Hi, I'm Katie Moran, and this is Artistic Spirit, your place for art, mental health, and spirituality. I'm here with Sharon Valenti, a serial entrepreneur, coach, and trainer. She is the founder of Sharon's Club. Sharon, can you tell me a little bit about your work?
Certainly. So as a result of my own life experience, which I'm sure we'll touch base on, I have watched so many people suffer emotionally, mostly because of the underlying beliefs, the unconscious underlying beliefs that they have. And as a result of my own path and discovering that about myself and others, and thus eventually becoming an expert in that area, I learned that when I help people uncover those underlying beliefs that have formed the patterns in their life, the why they've attracted certain events to them, why they keep attracting the same kind of relationships and same situations over and over, that I'm able to help them see the why of that and question it. And once they do, all that's left is the truth. And it's quite emotional and quite revealing and totally freeing. So that's why I do what I do.
That's amazing. So you say you help people with discovering the why. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like I've had cycles before, especially trauma cycles, things like that. And I've healed a lot through art, but I've never really uncovered that deeper why and things like that. So like, how would someone go about finding that and exploring it?
Well, that ties into a number of things. Most of it starts when we are young children, and we interpret things and we receive things differently than what they're actually said. So you might have been 3 years old and you put lipstick on the wall in your mother's living room, and she was a little upset about that. And she said, "Katie, no, bad." And you hear, "I'm a bad girl. Mommy doesn't love me anymore," or "Mommy doesn't love me." Now, your mom didn't say that to you. You said that to you, but it sticks. Everybody says something different to themselves. But that "I'm not lovable, Mommy doesn't love me, and I'm a bad girl" sticks. Now you're out with your friends and you do something that irritates your little playmates and they storm off. And that sense of "I'm not lovable, I'm not good, I'm bad" gets reinforced. Then you start in school and you displease the teacher. Maybe she has you come up in the front, and it depends on which schooling you go to. She might have stood you in the dunce's corner. Now that's even more reinforced. And the cycle goes on and we're not even aware. And we get older, we go into relationships, and they're the same pattern and same reinforcement. And when we're small, we are taught to look outside of ourselves for that love and approval and appreciation and support. And that's not where it's at. And so we have this constant longing going on, when really the only person it's not your job to love me, Katie, or like me or support me. It's my job to do that for myself. I'm the only one that really knows what it looks like to love Sharon or to support me in the way I need to be supported. If you love me or support me or like me or whatever, that's like icing on the cake. That's yours to give, not mine to take. The same with my husband. If he loves me, and I'm sure he does, that's wonderful. But if I expect him to do that, I put this terrible burden on him to perform to something I want, and he can't. And so I get disappointed. He's frustrated and feeling bad about himself because he can't achieve the impossible task I've asked him to do. And people get together and do that all the time. I think really the only unconditional relationships that there are might be with your very, very best friend whom you accept no matter what, and with, if you're a parent, with your child or with your pet. even with a pet though, if the pet, that's not an unconditional love. If your pet didn't make you happy or satisfy you in some way, you wouldn't like your pet. You wouldn't want your pet anymore. We're in a lot of these relationships because of that expectation. And I think it's Don Miguel Ruiz in Mastery of Love. He talks about boy meets girl and falls in love. And he says to all of his friends, oh, she's the one. I've been waiting for her. She's definitely the one. And she's over there telling her girlfriends the same thing. He's the one that they get married. And what's the first thing they do? They try and change each other. What happened to she's perfect and he's perfect, right? This is what people do. Instead of living in interdependent relationships, we tend to fall into dependent and codependent and independent. Interdependent is where you truly accept someone the way they are. You don't try and change them. And you both are accepting and you come together in such a beautiful way. Again, like you're really close friends. You don't expect them to be identical to you and do everything your way. You accept they're that way and you're this way. And when you get together, you have a blast, right? So in our most intimate relationships, what gives us the right to believe that we have that right to change another person? And this is where a lot of conflict comes in. It comes in, though, because of those underlying beliefs. So if Frank is down there and watching one of his Western movies, and I trot downstairs in this brand new dress that I just bought, and I think I look like hot stuff, and I say, hey, honey, what do you think of this dress? And he does a quick glance over. He's right in that juicy part of the movie. He goes, yeah, it's great. I want him to fall all over me and say how sexy I look and all the other things. So now I'm irritated. Oh, he doesn't love me. Look, he couldn't even spend 5 seconds to look at me properly. And then I go storming upstairs. The poor guy is in the middle of a movie that I came down and interrupted. And he's acknowledged I look good, but that's not enough. I want him fawning all over me. And that's not fair. That's not what he's meant to be in my life. And that goes all the way back to that 3-year-old, 4-year-old that says, I'm not enough. I'm not lovable enough, pretty enough, smart enough, intelligent, skinny enough, fat enough, whatever. We all suffer a form of that not enoughness syndrome. And with addictions, for example, people that become addicted to various things in life, generally it's because they are looking for relief in all the wrong places. And while we're like, well, how could pornography be relief? Or how could child abuse be relief? Or everybody in every given moment is doing the very best they can, just like the child abuser, the serial killer, in that demented mindset, that is the best they can do in that moment. And to just delve into my own background for a moment that brought me up to where I'm at today, I grew up, and like many my age, with 2 alcoholic parents. My mother was one of those very violent drunk people, in violent physically, mentally. She told me I should have smothered at birth. I was the daughter of Satan. I was adopted, and I wasn't. But she used to say all these hateful, horrible things to me. If it was good enough for the dog, it was too good for me. So I got a lot of beliefs about myself, that I wasn't lovable and I was only to be hated and all these other things. And when I was 8 years old, I awakened from a nap to find my father touching me where he wasn't ever supposed to touch me, where I had been taught nobody was supposed to touch me. And so what happened as a result of my mother, physical violence and the shouting, screaming, and yelling and all of that became normal for me. It was just normal for me. And my father molesting me, I looked back on this later, and I had gained a belief that was a man's way of showing love, by letting a man touch me inappropriately or do what he wanted inappropriately. That would make him love me, because my little mind couldn't understand how two people who are supposed to be the ones I can trust. This is why we don't feel safe, because we were punished by our parents. So how can we feel safe in an unsafe environment? And I didn't have anybody that I could report this to. My father knew my mother was abusing me. My mother had no idea my father abused me. And at 8 years old, I had nobody I could tell. So I shoved that down for years and years and years. But it created an underlying belief and a pattern. So going forward, the men that I dated and so on and so forth, and the relationships that I had were not normal relationships, although in my warped way of thinking, these men loved me. They didn't really, of course they didn't, but that's the belief that I had taken on. And the abusive relationships that I got into, including 16 years with my ex-husband, were all because I believed at that time that's all I deserved. I really believed not that I was the daughter of Satan, but that everything was too good for me and I didn't deserve anything good. And talk about no self-esteem and no self-confidence. And then in the middle of this violent argument with my ex-husband, I just had this voice say, can you take 5 more years of this? And immediately a voice said, no, you have to get out. And I took that to heart. And I had 2 young children at that time. So I little by little started sneaking things out the house into a storage facility, until I was at a point where I had everything out that I needed and wanted. And my mother was visiting and found me a place to rent, and I moved out. And it was still a long and very fearful time before I was able to get a divorce. But 10 years before I dated anybody, because I was so afraid of going into a bad relationship again. In between all of that, at that moment when I made up my mind, I had to leave that abusive relationship, I began to realize the common denominator was me. And that if I didn't start changing myself, I would keep taking this baggage with me. It was such a habit to blame everyone and everything else for what was going on in my life. You know, he's the SOB and he makes my life miserable. The truth is, he didn't. I chose to stay in that relationship out of fear, out of the beliefs that I had. And that's what held me there. That fear is thinking something in the future is going to have a disastrous outcome, rather than seeing the openness of the university and the potential for something really, the potential that something wonderful is waiting for me. That's how I perceive life now. But then in the mindset, it's all dark and bleak. And this is oftentimes why battered women stay in abusive relationships. They have no faith in themselves. They believe they're trash and worthless. And that abusive, violent situation is so familiar. They don't know, including myself at that time, how to accept and receive kindness from anyone. Somebody will tell you you're pretty, and you're like, you're kidding, right? Or that's a beautiful, this rag, it just couldn't take a compliment, couldn't believe something nice. So a little bit of humor and irony in this. Our local community college was having one of those off-campus in the trailer courses on developing self-confidence. So I signed up for it and I show up on time and I'm the only one who showed up. So they canceled the course. It was like, so much for self-confidence course. But what that did start was me getting my hands on a lot of books, on a lot of tapes, and listening and reading and taking it to heart and applying it. A self-help book is no good unless you are applying the things that you learn. And sometimes you can read, or I can, an entire book and get one thing out of it, but that's all I needed to get out of it that flicks a switch. We all learn differently. Would you agree? Some can read, listen. And as I progressed in my life, and it's called like a positive addiction, actually, the more I fed myself with that positive information, and I moved away from my ex, who we were in Pennsylvania at the time, to Florida, and had a fresh new start down there. And I didn't know anybody, so I joined a couple of local groups to get myself out of the house so I wouldn't be isolated. And then a friend of mine said, oh, you need to get on meetup.com. And I thought it was a dating service. No, I'm not interested. She, no, it's not what you think. So I go on Meetup, and it opened up a whole new world for me. There were law of attraction meetings. That was around the time the movie The Secret came out. There were book clubs. There was everything that started to draw me to another belief, a way of believing about life in general. And that also started me down a mystical path, really. I no longer, and I don't, this is not a conversation about religion, but I have a different outlook now. I don't believe there's somebody sitting on a throne in the sky anymore, or somebody in the ground with a pitchfork and flames. For me, my heaven and hell have been here on earth, and they are whatever I make of it. And as I went through the different books, through the different courses, and surrounded myself with like-minded people, I came to understand truthfully, when they say we create our reality, I understand that now. We are thinking thoughts all day long, and the only place anything is ever real is in our mind. Whether we're thinking in the moment, in the future, in the past, it's only ever taking place right here in my mind. And it feels so real, and it's not true, because it's not taking place anyplace else outside of me. So I am in that moment creating my reality. If I feel anxious, I'm thinking about the future again, and I'm perceiving something that doesn't even exist, and I'm scaring the daylights out of myself. If I feel sad and depressed, it's because I'm dragging something from the past that's already over and done with, and I'm making myself relive it. And even in the future, I am causing myself to live in my mind the very thing I don't want to have, but I'm doing it to me. And so I can't blame anybody anymore. I take full responsibility for my life and for what happens. And people will say, oh, well, did you attract your son's death? Truthfully, I don't know. I do believe we choose to have certain experiences here. I also believe we choose the time that we are going to leave the physical body and step into the next life. I mean, it's just like going from one foot here into another world. That's all. We never die. Our consciousness, physically, yes, our consciousness never dies. And I can look back now, and I can see very clearly how I drew everything that happened to me, including all of the abuse, by my thoughts. If when I was 4, I had a thought, or you or anybody, instead of thinking I'm a bad girl, mommy doesn't love me, I could have thought, oh, mommy's in a bad mood today. And I wouldn't have taken on that belief, I'm a bad person, or I'm not the enoughness, but I didn't. We all have friends that say, oh, I came from great households, et cetera, et cetera. They took on different beliefs. 2 children, I have a daughter and a son. And I would say to myself, how can 2 children or more in the same household, same upbringing, see things so very differently? And I realized later, it's because we perceive things differently. We can all go to the same movie and come out of there, one loved it, one didn't. We just perceived it differently. That's all it comes down to, is different perceptions. And everybody is right, due to the fact that what we create in our mind is our reality. The problems arise when we try and force somebody else to take on our belief, like religion and politics and things. And all these arguments are, people want my right to be better than your right, and everybody's right is equal. And if we could spread that out in the world and have people understand and embrace it, and slow down a little bit, think about the words that we use, think about what we're going to say before we say it. And even though we have no control over how it would be received, we certainly know if we say things in a kind way versus a horrible way, it will probably be received in the way we'd like it to be received. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so many moving parts in all of this. Our language alone, I've heard, and I've been guilty. You don't have the time, do you? Well, am I saying you don't, or am I saying do you? You know, we're not conscious. What do you have any milk, or you don't have any milk? Do you? You're not going over there, are you? Are you going or not going? And we give such mixed messages without realizing we are doing it, and we say things. I remember telling my son he was going to broil something, and I remember telling him to leave the oven door open a little bit, and he said, why do we have to do that? And I looked at him, I said, I have no idea. That's just what I was told to do. And we're like robots. Now we need to question things. If you walk under a ladder, do you really believe you're going to have bad luck? Or if you break a mirror, 7 years bad luck, or step on a crack, break your mother's back? No, of course not. But why do we believe some things and not others? Why aren't we questioning everything? All these handed down beliefs that we have taken on are not even ours. Why don't we let them go and start getting our own beliefs? Now, after I moved to Florida, I started getting involved in, as I said, the meetup groups, and I started going to what I call spiritual centers and getting involved. And I really, after my son passed away, I really wanted to stay in touch with him. And I've never been afraid of psychics or mediums, or not, that world has never bothered me at all. It's always fascinated me, actually, and I don't believe it's the devil's work or anything else. And I decided to go to learn mediumship because in my mind, I thought I would be able to speak to my son and hear his voice the same way I heard it when he was physically here. And I was naive. You don't hear their voice that way. It's just a message, that it's a thought. It comes into your mind, or an image. Or so I went to a local mediumship group, and then I flew to England to go to the Arthur Findlay College of Mediumship, and I took one of their specialized weeks, and we did various exercises. I didn't know anybody there, but what was happening was, as I was sitting across from the person that I was partnered with, it's almost like you're sitting there and you're listening for something at a different level. You're just sitting there. And I was getting these images and these words, and I would say whatever I was given, because that's what we were taught to, whether it made sense to me or not. Just give the message, give the words. And I did. She's like, oh, that's my cousin you're talking about. And inside I'm like, holy smoke, you can't believe it. And this went on the entire week. And then I came home and I kept on doing with other groups. And I finally understood how to communicate with my son. He has a very unusual name, and he has given me a bazillion signs of his presence. So this is how I know our consciousness goes on. I mean, it just impossible signs that because his name's so unusual, I can actually prove it with pictures that have shown up and other things that have shown up. And then I've always been curious about different things. So my husband and I, we signed up to go to Bali to learn to read the Akashic Records, which are everybody has a book of life, and it's accessed through the Akashic Records. So we went through level 1 through 4 and became certified in that. And even before all that, I became certified in Reiki, which is a form of energy healing. And I don't practice any of that anymore. Doesn't mean it goes away. It just means I just don't practice it anymore. It fulfilled what I needed it to do in that moment in my life. But the biggest turning point in all of this mind shifting that was going on was I learned how to slow down every time I got triggered by something and find out what was being reflected back to me about myself in that moment. And it was not a necessarily easy task to do. We hear that expression, peel away the layers of the onion. It was a bit like that. I'd get angry, and underneath the anger was that need to control. And underneath the need to control was either you don't think my idea is good enough, or you don't think I'm good enough, you don't think I'm smart enough, you won't take my idea, you have to validate it through 30 other people, then you come back and insult me and tell me that, now I'm angry at you. Childish, but it's what happens because, again, been taught to look outside of myself for all of that approval. And my mind was like, why can't you just believe me? Why don't you just believe me? What I understand now is whatever happens in that other person, whatever they say or do, is not about me. It's about what's going on in them. It only becomes about me when I get triggered. And I welcome those opportunities now because it shows me I still have an area that needs to be questioned. I need to see what I'm believing about myself and see if it's even true. And it never is. It feels true and it isn't true. And so over the time of doing that and questioning and getting triggered, I've had such a mind shift. I know people say to forgive, and forgiving is not for me, for the simple reason, if this is for me, when I have forgiven someone, still somewhere in the back of my mind, I'm holding them, oh, you did something wrong, but I'll forgive you. And the forgiveness is supposed to be for myself. And I'm aware I haven't totally let you go, let you off the hook. But if I accept you and I say, well, that's just the way you are, Katie, and I accept that, and I have a choice. I can either keep being your friend or I can move on. It's that simple, but there's no condemning you. There's no resistance. There's no mental attachment. And that's what I ended up doing with my parents. It was the greatest gift I gave myself. My father literally was a child molester. And I was shocked when I heard that in my mind. It was like, holy cow, it was just such shock. And then I said, okay, that's the best he could do in that moment. I accept that, but I want nothing more to do with him, not even in my thinking. And the same with my mother. I can look back on my mother and both parents, and I feel such compassion for them. I can see they both had very troubled childhoods themselves. My father grew up in a very strict Irish Catholic family, was never allowed to talk at the dinner table. His mother left at a young age, blah, blah, blah. My mother had an unhappy childhood, but I was so blinded in my own problems with them. I couldn't see it until much, much later. And that's when I found acceptance for them. And I also live by a mantra today. How do I know it should have happened that way? Because it did. And it's that straightforward. There's no arguing. There's no, oh, it should be this way, should be that way. It's, how do I know it should be that way? Because it was. How do I know my son should have died? Because he did. That didn't make it any easier to not miss him or not grieve because he's no longer physically here. But I didn't argue with the fact that he was dead. I didn't argue with the fact that my parents were the way they were anymore, or that the rest of my life ended up the way it had been. And going forward, how do I know my life should be this way now? And that my role is to serve and help others find their underlying beliefs and find their truth and their freedom and live the kind of life that they've always dreamed of, because that's what I'm doing now. So how do I know I should be doing it? Because that's what I'm doing. Now, a year from now, it might be something different, but for now, that's what I'm doing. So there's no resistance trying to find who am I, who am I, who am I? I am who I am in this moment, doing what I do best in this moment. And there's no angst in that. I'm not living my past anymore because it is my past and because it doesn't feel good. So why would I deliberately keep putting myself in the past, in my thoughts, and keep making myself feel shitty? I mean, that's insanity. To me, that's insanity. And yet I did it. I did it for a long while in my life because I didn't understand how much control I really do have over myself, over my thoughts. And I hear people say things like, oh, you need to love yourself. Great. How do I do it? Nobody tells you how to do these things. Oh, you need self-confidence. How do you do it? Nobody tells you. Louise Hay, who is a marvelous author who has since left this earth, she owns Hay House. She has a book, How Can You Can Heal Your Life. And her story about the salad was a game changer for me about self-love. You know, we'll go in the kitchen and we'll make ourselves a salad, and those little cherry tomatoes start to get crinkled, and the lettuce, we'll pick off the brown pieces and the slimy pieces and put the rest in the bowl. And we'll be okay with those crinkled, cut the slimy piece of the cucumber and make the rest. Would you serve that salad to me if I came over as your guest? No. What would you do?
You get better ingredients.
Right. Buy all the salad stuff, right? And so her question was, why would you do more for someone else than you would do for yourself? And again, part of that comes from upbringing. Certainly my generation, I was always taught, let others go first, let the company go in, sit down first, help themselves to the food first, let them go in the door first. And everybody came first, and I always came last. We were trained to do that. So as I got older, to do something nice for myself or do it first, I would feel so guilty. It took me so long to overcome feeling like I was doing something wrong, because in the back of my mind was one of the parents, my mother specifically, telling me I was bad or wrong because I was doing me first. And I would have given you the shirt off my back, my last dollar, but wouldn't do it for me. I'll pay for my daughter to go for a whole day in the salon for $150, but I tremble to do it for myself. And so just starting out with small things like the salad, making a beautiful fresh salad for yourself, setting the table as you would if you had company over, and just physically enjoying that moment, not multitasking, not reading or watching TV, just be there and enjoy what you've just done for yourself. That is the beginning of a step to self-love. And the more you do those small things that you would have done for others, do for yourself until you feel comfortable doing it, that's how you build up self-love. And I'm sure you're familiar with mirror work, where you go and you say the affirmations. So the purpose of that is not to make you believe what you're telling yourself. It's to see what comes up while you're telling yourself that. So if you're there saying, I love you, Katie, I love you, Katie, I love you, Katie, and you're like, right, look at those cheeks. Oh, I didn't get my eyeshadow on right. You know, that's what's coming up. And you need to look at that. Is it true you didn't do your eyeshadow right? Who's judging you? Is it true whatever else comes up? And you 100% true? No, whatever you're believing about yourself is really the truth. And the answer is no. Or can you, oh, I've opened a can of worms.
Yeah, well, I think it's so important to kind of hear what you say there about it's not really the words of the affirmation, it's what you are saying to yourself to try and tell you that you're not worthy of those words. And I think like that, I've never heard it like that. And I love when I talk to people and something clicks. And like in that moment, that really clicked for me. And like, even like in terms of like self-care and self-love, like I had to like tell myself like I'm the type of person who takes care of myself. I'm the type of person who values self-care. I'm the type of person who believes in a culture of self-love and self-care. And like I had to like really ingrain that into my identity to really prioritize and like tell myself that I was worthy of that, and that I didn't have to give before I like gave to myself.
It takes courage. It takes work. And if your life is so down in the dumps, and that's a very broad term, it takes a lot to pull yourself up out of the depths of that misery and despair and push yourself just a little bit. I mean, I remember when I was younger, when I was in my teens, I tried 3 different times to commit suicide. I tried twice with pills and just ended up feeling awful the next day. And then I tried cutting my wrist. And I remember the doctor saying, "Oh, you didn't cut it the right way. You should have cut it this way instead of that way." So that kind of was a bit of a wake up call for me. But I just felt so much despair. I felt like I would never get out from under the violence, the loneliness, the sadness. I used to go and sit in a park by myself on this bench, and I would rock back and forth to try and comfort myself. I didn't understand that's what I was doing until later, but that was a form of just trying to comfort myself. And I'm glad I did. I'm glad I didn't succeed, because I wouldn't be out there able to help others today. But to feel that low in life, and the teen years are very difficult. I mean, we're already going through hormonal changes, and we're not quite the adult yet. And we're trying to break out from under our parents if we're still living with our parents. We're many of us not getting the attention, the love, the approval from our parents. I mean, I just genuinely believe my mother did not know how to love me or my sister. And I believe that to be true, but I don't know that's 100% true. Maybe her yelling and screaming was her way of showing love. I don't know, but it sure didn't feel like it at the time. And then when I was older and in my very first love relationship, you know what that first love is like, and he wasn't as into it as I was. That was the third time, and I just thought life was over. Here's this one person I've given everything that lived inside of me to, and he's just not that interested. And my heart really was broken. You know, every first in our life, there's only one time that first can happen. So changed me to a large degree. Dale Carnegie, in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, has a part in there talking about self-confidence, and the way to develop it is by doing something you're really afraid of doing. Push yourself to do it the first time, and then you see, oh, it's not so bad. Do it again and again and again until you're comfortable. And you just keep doing that with the things. Public speaking is probably very close to the top of being a number one fear with people. And the reason is we're so connected, again, to worrying about what people are going to think about us. The truth is, we have no control over that. You could get on there and do a Cirque du Lace act on the stage, and some will love you and some won't. We can't control other people. So give it up, just like they can't control what you think of them. Get out there and just talk, say what's on your heart, kind of thing. That's one way of letting go of everything and just showing up as you. I think the most comfortable we ever are is when we're in our pajamas. You know, we just kick back or laid back, we're really authentic. But in the morning, when we get up and get dressed, unconsciously, we are dressing for everybody outside of us. If we're leaving the house to go to the office or the store for the day, or going to be on camera for the day, We are unconsciously dressing because we are concerned about how other people are going to think about us. And we have no control over it. We do these crazy things to ourselves all the time without realizing we're doing it. And like I said at the very beginning, the only place it's taking place is in our mind, where it feels very real, and it's not true. It's not true. And as we begin to slow down, and when we get triggered, instead of lashing out, go inside and say, what was I just believing about myself that just ticked me off so much that I want to punch the crap out of this person? And bring it back to you, because it's not the other person. If I'm hiding and you come in the door and I jump out and say boo, and you say you scared the daylights out of me, that's not true. All I said was boo. You saw the boogeyman and the ghosts and whatever you saw that made you jump, right? So, and it's just like fear. Some people say that we are born with fear. I believe we are born with a startle reflex. We hear a loud noise, it'll make us jump. But if you take a 6-month-old or a 1-year-old and you put them in the middle of a Los Angeles freeway, they don't know to be afraid any more than the little puppy or the little duck crossing. They're just there. They don't know fear until they're taught to be afraid. No, you'll get hurt. Don't do that. You'll get hurt. And then we are taught to be afraid. We can unlearn this stuff. There's so much to be unafraid of. There's so much out there to look forward to. Even when we don't believe it, it's there. We just have to be open to seeing that it's there, to believing that it's there. Believe it's there. You don't have to see it to believe it. Believe it before you see it, and it will show up, but you have to believe it. And it will happen. I mean, it really is that simple and hard at the same time, because you have to just retrain yourself. Every time, it's like meditation. You don't have to sit like this and say, Om. You just have to get quiet. And when your mind drifts, just notice it and bring it back. Great. Now you're in the process of retraining your mind. The fact that you even noticed is the starting point. And the more you bring your mind back and the more you bring it back, the stiller you will become for longer periods of time. And it's the same as I stepped into that whole spiritual metaphysical realm. I just allowed myself to be open-minded. I was still in the beginning very judgmental. I heard things that sounded so weird and bizarre to me. And then I would meet other complete strangers in complete other ends of the state, and they'd be saying the same thing. And after a while, I thought, who am I to judge? This is their reality. And how do I know it's not true? I don't. So just learning to be open and letting go, or at the very least, questioning those beliefs you have. Can I 100% know they're true? Or can I find one good reason to keep that belief? And most of the time, we can't find one good reason to keep on holding on to the things that we hold on to. But mostly become conscious that when you are feeling depressed, it is because you are bringing the past into this moment. And it's only existing in this moment because you brought it here. If you're feeling that low, if you can move yourself to anger, so if you can find something about that situation to really get angry about, that will move you up the emotional scale. So it will begin to pull you out of the depression into a different vibration. And from anger, you can move yourself into another mindset. The fear, remember, you're creating something in the future that hasn't happened outside of your mind. Create something beautiful instead. Say, oh, I don't want it to have that kind of ending. I want to go on that vacation and it's going to be like this instead. And just allow that feeling. Or if you can't do that, visualize stroking your kitten or your dog, or eating a bowl of chocolate ice cream with Hershey's chocolate syrup on it. What, just think of something that does feel a little bit better to you, and that will bring you back into this present moment. And I'll remind everybody of this. There are 3 kinds of business. And if you hear nothing else I've said, hear this. There is your business, there's my business, and there's the divine's business. The only time we can ever get upset is when we're in somebody else's business. And that's even if it's just in our mind. A simple example, if you're ever out to eat and you kind of look around, you're like, what were they thinking when they put that outfit on? Or God, look at the way they're eating. Whose business is it what somebody else does, right? It's theirs. Come back to your business. Just focus on what's in front of you. You can have those mental conversations with somebody else and get your blood pressure all worked up. And that person's innocent. They don't even know you've had that conversation with them because it's only happened in your mind. And notice you're in their business and you are doing it to yourself. So your business, my business, and the divine's business. When you're in your business, when it's just you and me, we're fine. The minute the thought goes running, now we're in somebody else's business. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever been in somebody else's business and got upset?
I think a lot of the times if I kind of like see something and it triggers like a belief I have about myself, that it makes me like, it reminds me of something I'm upset about, even if it has nothing to do with anything someone has said or anything that someone like is about, like so kind of, I guess, like trauma triggers sometimes, but to be honest, I'm not that judgmental. Like I have a lot of like, I think I have a lot of like loops that are very much like about myself, and I think it's very much less about other people, and like anxiety, PTSD, depression. So a lot of the times it is like how I see myself. And even if someone treats me in a way that is like not okay, like I think sometimes I'm more prone to tell myself like that's a, like you said in the beginning, like that's a reflection of me rather than that's a reflection of them. But like obviously the emotions I'm having are coming from me, it's not what they're doing. But at the same time, like I think there has to be that narrative and kind of like having a way to remind yourself that if someone says something that's not necessarily true. And how you said sometimes people say things because they're in a certain place, like so many times, but you don't think about like how are they feeling that they thought that it was somehow appropriate to treat me this way. And I think like that is something that really like resonated with me. But I have 2 questions. So the first question is, what is divine business? And also the second question, what is kind of like the thought process that takes you from being triggered by something to reframing your traumatic beliefs?
So to answer the first one, let's say there's a tsunami or a volcano and the lava comes and it destroys a whole town, and that's devastating. There are people that will fret about that for days and weeks and go around everybody doing a GoFundMe, is that what it's called? And make it their life's work, so to speak. That's a natural disaster. That's a God thing. It's not anything. It's not my business. I can't do anything. The earthquake has happened. The volcano has happened. Why am I in that business? I can't, to get myself all upset about it. So I'm still guilty of doing this. I will, on TikTok, sometimes watch those animal things, and it's always the dogs, just in dreadful state, and somebody's rescuing them. And maybe that's why I watch it, because I know there's usually a happy ending. But I get such a story in my mind, like how could a person treat an animal that way? And I had this whole scenario going on, and I don't even know if it's true. I don't even know if that is not a, what's that stuff that you can make up? What's it called? No, they say the Kardashians do it. What's it called? You paint and make yourself look better. How do I know that's not somebody who's just doctored up that dog to make it look ill? I don't, because if I'm not there and I'm not seeing it with my own eyes, I don't even know if it's true, if it's real, but my mind thinks it's real. And so I create this whole story around it. And I am doing this to me by deliberately staying on that video, watching that. Now that is insanity. And you could do that with those natural disasters, but that's not my business. I'm not putting my head in the sand. It is simply out of my hands, out of my control. It's the divine's business. And I use the word divine because not everybody says God. Other people say Allah and Buddha and whomever, just using a generalized word there. And your second question was about being triggered, and ask it again, please.
So how do you go from that moment where you're triggered to reframing your traumatic belief? Because obviously when you're triggered, what comes up are those same stories you've been telling yourself sometimes since childhood.
Yeah. So I've worked through those, like with my father. When I was able to sit and look back on that, it took me 5 different tries, 5 different sessions of sitting with it. Because initially I was like, oh, I'm his daughter. How could he do that to me? Da, da, da. Because I was in that frame of mind. So it had already happened and I'm still in the past. How could he do it to me? It's already done. It's already done, but I'm still reliving that moment, even though I can't see it 100% clearly. But it got to a point where each time I questioned how it made me feel in that moment, I was able to go back and see. So I kept looking at it, is what it was. I kept looking to see how I believed he made me feel in that moment. He made me feel like a whore. He made me feel filthy. He made me feel ashamed of myself. He made me feel guilty for it happening. He made me feel like I shouldn't have even been alive, and then it wouldn't have happened because this person I loved and trusted would never have done that if I had never been alive. So I made it all my fault. I'm 8 years old, for God's sakes. I mean, how could it be my fault? But this is what our small minds do. We're children. We don't know better. So having looked at every one of those things I believed he made me feel, and going through some questions, I was able to finally see it was me doing it to me. He made me feel ashamed of myself. Can I absolutely know my father in that moment of touching me, he made me feel ashamed? My answer is no. My honest answer is no. But I get to this part where I'm going to look at it from another perspective. He didn't make me feel ashamed. Well, the truth is, he didn't. He simply, I don't want to say simply, he touched me inappropriately. That was what he did. I made him feel ashamed. I did in my mind, because in my mind I was saying, this is bad, Daddy. You're a bad daddy. You shouldn't be doing this to me because you told me nobody should ever do this to me. And I had that litany running. I made myself feel ashamed. That's the true statement. I did it to me. I made me feel ashamed. All those years, I squashed that down for over almost 30 years. I just completely suppressed that, and it didn't come up again till I was in my 30s, and it was ready to be looked at. But because I have that method of questioning and being able to look at it with clarity, I could see I replayed that scene over and over and over. And as far as I know and remember, it only happened one time. But even if it happened 10 times, I played it 100,000 times over the years in my mind. And when it really came up, then, oh my God, I played it over and over and over, because again, in the beginning, I was like, oh my God, how could he do that? I mean, I was just so caught up in the poor me victim that I couldn't move out of that right away. And that was okay. And I didn't feel like it had cleared out of me yet in my mind. So I sat with it again, and I looked at how else did I believe he made me feel. So I looked at the next thing I was feeling. He made me feel like a whore. Well, at 8 years old, I don't know if I knew the word whore, but later in life, as I kept replaying that at some level, and the relationships that I had and the way they played out, because I was mistaking the sexual antics as they love me, these guys love me, and that's why they do that. I made myself feel like a whore. I really did. And, looking for love in all the wrong places. Again, so I was addicted. I was not sexually addicted, but I can see how people go fall into it, because you're looking for that release, that escape, that whatever in all the wrong ways. Well, I was looking for love in all the wrong ways and mistaking that. So I was doing it to me over and over. And I was telling myself, I'm nothing better than a whore. I'm nothing better than a whore. And that wasn't true, but I believed it about myself. And it wasn't anything my father made me feel. It's me doing it to me. So if my husband comes up and grabs my ass or says a remark to me or something that triggers me, and I want to knock him from here to kingdom come, I don't. I get very still, and I'm like, shit, what was I just believing? Oh man, that makes me feel like a slut. That makes me feel like a whore. That makes me feel like he doesn't love me. He doesn't care about me. He thinks I'm less than. All that will run through my mind, and I have to take it one at a time. Is it true that he just made me feel that way? No, I just completely labeled myself that. So that's why I said it's work, and it's worth it. My God, it's so worth it, because after you do all of that and you see none of that's real, and even if it arises again, you're like, I already questioned that, and I know that that's not true. You do that enough times, if somebody can say it, do something, and it doesn't even bother you. And you get to a point, like I said a bit ago, I welcome that. I want to see, go ahead, trigger me, man, trigger me. I want to see where I'm believing something I don't want to be believing, because I am doing it to me. And those triggers are real triggers. But the clarity is, it's not the other person, it's what I'm believing about myself. So one thing that is easy, that could be easy for people to do, is when you get triggered. So let me use this example with my husband. Frank hit me on my butt, and that means that ... And underneath that, very quickly, right, it means what? He has no respect for me. He doesn't think much of me. He thinks I'm a toy, and whatever. Now, every one of those things that came out very quickly, go back and say, did he really make me feel like that in that moment? And then I certainly in my mind, I called him a bunch of names right away, because I was so angry and hurt and everything else. But he didn't hurt me. I hurt me with those beliefs that quickly came up in myself. I made me feel like that. I made me believe that he thinks I'm a toy. I made me believe he doesn't respect me, or I'm not worthy of respect. I'm doing it to me. Can you understand that? Yeah. And so it takes some practice. It takes some really controlling yourself initially, but that any situation that keeps running through your mind, any recurring thought, go ahead and write down, just like I did, Frank hit my butt, and that means that, and write down whatever it is, and look at those beliefs you've got about yourself. And are they 100% true about yourself? And as you sit with those things that you wrote and you look at them, they can be emotional sometimes because they're deep wounds in us. They're deep, deep beliefs, and they've been living there a long time. I carried that shame for 30 years plus before it came up. And then the sadness came when I looked back on how I had allowed my body to be used, how I was so pathetic looking for these men to love me, and my friends' family. I just wanted to live with them and be in a loving family. I was such a victim and in such that mindset. And it was so sad to see I'd lived half of my life like that when I could have been living it joyfully had I have understood what I'm explaining to you, to look at those things and question those things. And that's why I do what I do today. I've created, it should be ready and fully rolled out next week, Sharon.club. And in that, I have a signature course called Blueprint for Stress Release. And it is what we're talking about, only even more intense. The first lesson will help you bring up all of your beliefs, all those hidden beliefs right away. And there's other pieces to that, and you'll get through that. You may need a couple days to just regroup after it, because it's pretty heavy duty, that first lesson. And then it will walk you through questions and other situations that will help you have a broader perspective and help you and give you lifelong tools. And there's other courses in there designed to help with anxiety, with depression, and things that go on, things that you can do in the moment when you're feeling like that, just to begin to pull yourself out of it a little bit. And there's some ebooks, and there will be some like this, not a podcast, but some interviews and some master classes with helpful information to help with mental wellness. Now, I'm not a mental health counselor. If you need a mental health counselor or you need prescriptions, I'm not the person for that. I do know this area very well, and I am an expert in helping people find those underlying beliefs and learn to question them. And I have gone from that person that would, I call them one-liners, but I heard children should be seen and not heard so much when I was young, and children should speak only when spoken to. I believed that I was, by that one line, children should be seen and not heard, that I was unimportant and that I should show up invisible. And that's exactly what I did. It fueled that belief in myself. I'm not important. That's how I'd show up. And I'd sit in a room with my friends, my closest friends, and they'd be talking around me. And I jokingly say, what am I, chopped liver? And they'd be like, oh, ha, ha, and then they include me. But evidently, I was showing up visible somehow. And as I began this work and I saw all of this, all those beliefs came up. And I questioned, are they 100% true? And they never were. I'm valuable. I have valuable input. I'm an intelligent woman. I am attractive. I am blah, blah, blah. I am all these very positive things. And I'm none of those other awful things. And I never have been. I have done 360-degree turnaround. And my husband, he's been a licensed psychologist for over 40 years. So he's very well versed in his practice. He often says to me, I wish I had have started this turn of events the same time you started, because I am nothing short of a miracle. I'm such a different person. And all the people that I've worked with have had this same thing. And it's not anything I do. It's just giving the steps and showing you how to do it. You're the one who's really doing it, because you know what your hurts and your pain and your suffering are. So you're going to be working on those specific things. I just show you how to do it. And for less than a cost of a Starbucks coffee, for $10 a month membership, all these courses are available. And each month, each week, new stuff will be put, new information, new helpful stuff will be put in there, and it's yours. Everything will just continue to grow for as long as you're a member, a paid member. This will be yours forever. And there are moments where we all slide back. We forget. We're human beings. but we have that knowledge now of how to get ourselves out of it, how to not have those triggers anymore. And to get to that point, the first time I understood, the first time I said, oh, I look forward to my father molesting me again, it was like, what? And it's like, yeah, because I want to see where I'm still arguing with reality. How do I know it should have happened that way? It did. What am I still believing about myself? What am I believing he made me feel? Let me find out if it's true. And so I can welcome that now. And it gets to a point where things that used to bother you you don't even realize it, but they don't bother you. And people that might be in your life now, they just fall out of your life. It's not that you have any arguments. It's just you evolve in such a way, you start attracting more like-kind people. I'm sure you've noticed that in your own path, right? As you've grown on your spiritual path, different people have faded away and new people have come in, right? You've got over 10,000 followers following you now on Instagram. So definitely your path has changed, right?
Absolutely.
Did that question?
Yes, it did. And thank you so much. Thank you for just sharing all of your story. It's really powerful, and I'm so glad that you're using everything that you've been through, everything that you've learned, and all of your experiences to really like make the world a better place. And not only just that, like in a general sense, but to like individually help people who are suffering. And I know that's part of your mission, and I just really want to thank you for all the work that you do, and thank you for coming on my podcast today.
Thank you so much, Katie, for having me. I know I talked on, but there's so much to share with people to help them. And I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks.